All right, let's pray and we'll get started. Thank you for a good week. Thank you for the beautiful sunny day today. Thank you for the reminder that the grace of God is sufficient. We just ask that the person of the Lord Jesus Christ and the greatness of our triune God would be our primary motivation for serving, for living, for continuing in that which we're doing, recognizing your sovereign direction in all things. Thank you for these students. Pray for the ball teams that are traveling, for your protection and for a good testimony for the Lord. And just ask that you'd be honored as we head into the weekend. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so I was going to ask you, you got a day off yesterday. So was your natural inclination more being or doing? I'm going to take advantage of this to get a lot of things done, or I'm just going to enjoy the day and relax with friends and cultivate my life. Jules?
It's like a little bit of both. Like I was planning on doing school, but I would say mainly mine was more being.
Okay.
School day, I could socialize.
All right. All right, good. Anybody else? Justin?
I wanted to do, but I ended up doing.
Yeah, there's a certain motivation for that around here. I suppose if you're behind on, I'm not saying you're behind, but I'm saying if a student is behind on things, I suppose that's the first thing that comes to mind. God's given me a spare day to catch up a little bit. Yeah. Anybody else comment on that? Yeah.
I wanted to do, but I
What do you think motivated that?
there were just people around. Everyone was doing fun stuff. I was like, I'm going to do fun.
Yeah, you don't want to miss out on being able to develop relationships, hang out with people. Yeah, cool. Anybody else on that? I came in and spent 3 hours working on some stuff. Then I had lunch with a student. I would have probably gone to bed last night feeling like, rats, I missed a golden opportunity to get some things done on a free day. And I didn't. So that's, unfortunately, I tend to be wired more that way. But my wife and I did snuggle on the couch and watched some stuff on TV. So a movie. So last night. All right. So we started this page last time, but I don't think we finished it, correct? This is talking about the work world. And I think you guys understand when we talk about the work world, we're including ministry because ministry is work. It is an occupation. And so, and just as a sidelight, I'm reading a book right now that challenges the ever-growing thesis that professionalism in ministry is a bad thing. And if we just love Jesus and serve Jesus, then that's how God's going to use us. And, all this emphasis on preparation and, qualifications and developing a strategy and all those things are looked down on by a lot of people. Part of that is because of the influence of the secular society around us. There is an increasing distrust in our culture of leadership, of people in authority, of institutions. You hear about corruption, you hear about things happening, and even to some degree, the way that COVID was handled, many people became disillusioned with leadership and even companies. Major companies are supposed to know what they're doing and that sort of thing. That bleeds into the ministry world as well. And it makes it easy for us just to say, forget about all the professionalism and all of that. And there are some things about professionalism that need to be avoided. Anybody here read the book by John Piper, Brethren, We Are Not Professionals? I read the book, and it's a good book. And the book that I'm reading right now that kind of combats the anti-professionalism attitude is not combating Piper's thesis. Let me just explain briefly, because this does tie into what we're talking about here. What Piper is concerned about in his book is an attitude on the part of some people in ministry who have degrees, they've spent tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to prepare. And so they develop an expectation of status. I deserve to be called, by this title, or to be paid on a certain level because, after all, I invested this much. And so they look at professionals, in other realms, and what they've invested and what they, how they're viewed as a result, and they want that same status. And that's what Piper's fighting against. Look, John Piper himself has a school. He's training ministers for ministry. He publishes books that are done very professionally. You know what I'm saying? So to say that he is anti-professional, would be to basically fly in the face of everything he does. And so this book actually spends some time in the early chapters, making that clear. He's not combating, what Piper said. What he's combating is the attitude that we are wasting time, trying to be too intentional about preparation. And anyways, I commend the book. The book is called No Shortcuts, and No Shortcuts to Success. And if you're interested in reading it sometime when you have nothing else to read, which means it may be a while. But anyway, something you could put on your bucket list. All right, I just wanted to throw that in as a sidelight. So we tell me where we stopped. We did this one, right? Okay, and we did this one, right? And I think we did this one, right? We did that one. Mm-hmm. All right. And I think we talked about this one too, but people are often categorized by the question, what do you do? Remember, it's not wrong in our culture to ask someone that question. Probably even in our culture, I would say, don't make it your first question. And I'm sure that Mr. Hilla probably talks about this sort of thing in organizational leadership, And then it's hard for doing people to imagine how being people can be successful. So let's pause for a second. Give me your definition, your knee-jerk definition of success. What is success? Yeah. Jules first.
I was gonna say my knee-jerk reaction was like someone who is like rich and the top of the top at their business and like very successful or like very achieved their goal in life and are like proud of what they're doing.
Okay. All right. Good. Delaney.
I was just going to say people who achieve their goals.
Okay. Both mentioned achieving your goals. What else? Would everybody agree that a Christian worldview would include achieving goals in a definition of success? Has God established certain goals for us? What is the ultimate goal in the Christian worldview? I am successful as a Christian if I meet what goal? Glorify God. Okay. Which can sometimes be a little bit subjective. Sometimes to flesh that out is challenging. What else? A Christian is successful when he or she what, Paul?
Praising God.
Pardon?
Praising.
Okay, praising God, which would tie in to what she's saying. All right. Justin?
Like Christ.
Okay, being conformed to the image of, Paul establishes that as a clear, objective. What is God doing? Romans 8. He is conforming us into the image of Christ. Yeah. Now, Jules, you mentioned people getting rich, right, making money. What we have to be careful of is that we don't assume that those two are diametrically opposed. I can't become like Christ and become rich at the same time. And you all know that Paul said the love of money is the root of all evil, not money itself. If God allows you to be successful in business and make a lot of money, that doesn't mean that you have contradicted the Christian worldview. Does that make sense? If your goal in life is to be rich and everything else, takes second place, you got a problem, okay? But if God has chosen, if your goal is to honor Christ and God has gifted you in a way that brings about a good income, okay, then you haven't sinned in so doing. So it's just interesting. But by and large, people in a doing culture like the West I have a hard time imagining how people can be successful if they're, how being people can be successful. People that don't drive, to corporate success, climb the corporate ladder, however you want to describe it. Yeah. Okay. All right, good. Appreciate your comments on that. How about in school? All right, actually, two countries here are, really up on the, when it comes to the highest academic levels, and this may surprise you. One of them is Japan, and the other one is Finland. And I mean, Finland, where'd that come from? As we're going to see in the second half of the semester, Finland, well, what part of the world is Finland in? Yeah, it's part of the Nordic cluster that we'll call that, which includes Scandinavia. Right, and again, this is all dependent on who did the research, and that sort of thing. But Japan and Finland have two of the highest academic levels. Now, here's the interesting thing. Letter A, Japan, students go to school 6 days a week for more than 1,000 hours a year. This is also true in the U.S. Now, what's not true in the U.S. is going to school 6 days a week. But more than 1,000 hours a year, that's true. So aren't you glad you don't live in Japan? You get 2 days off instead of 1. If you're in Japan, you'd be going to school 6 days a week. Maybe you'd like that. Maybe you feel like you do that anyway because you have to spend all your spare time studying, right? Okay, but look at this in contrast. Finland, students study 600 hours a year, and that's also true in Korea. I mean, 60%, that's quite a slice off of what Japan does. 1,000 hours a year in Japan, but only 600 hours a year in Finland. And as you might guess, Finland is known to be more of a being culture, while Japan is more of a doing culture. And yet both of them rank very, very high in academic achievement. Does that tell you anything? What might you deduct from that? Yeah, deduce.
Well, in the case of the first one, it's not necessarily the amount of hours, and even both Japan and the U.S. are mostly like doing cultures. And I would have to guess that the U.S. is pretty low or middle of the pack in this. And so it's more about if the students are expected to, it's more of like I think the honor stream kind of plays into this a little bit, especially in the first one, because students are getting a little bit easier of a road in the U.S. than they are in Japan, as far as like what they are expected to do during the time that they're there.
Yeah, that's a good point. Japan, of course, is a very collectivistic culture, right? And therefore, the connection between father and grandfather, son, grandson, daughter, is very, very important, which means part of the motivation for doing well in school is to meet the expectations of your larger family. There is a responsibility on your shoulders to provide for your aging parents, grandparents, and that sort of thing. And so that does become a driving motivation. Whereas Finland is a very individualistic country, okay, as the Nordic cluster tends to be more. We'll see that again later on. And so you don't have that tie or responsibility to the family, but there's that self-driven motivation to become, what you want to become. And so, anyway, and I'm sure there are other factors, involved. What kind of curriculum do they use? What method did they use in the classroom? There are a lot of other things that are going to tie into this. We have to be careful that we're not overly simplistic in our evaluation. That makes sense, everybody? Okay. So, Japan a doing, Finland a being culture. And here they are. Yeah, okay. Okay, number 6, being normally goes with polychronic cultures. Now, somebody just remind us, what is a polychronic culture? Jules?
It is the type of culture, I would say more of hot climate culture, where it's more of I can just do it whenever. Like, if this meeting goes long, I don't mind.
Okay, good. And, this is being extreme. You might not even use the word schedule in your conversation. You might just have in your mind, that circle of things that, are going to have to be done sooner or later, but you're not thinking linearly so much. I mean, in the extreme case. Good. That makes sense. So it's much more about developing yourself and your relationships. So Delaney, you're thinking, I got to get these assignments done, but everybody's out having fun and developing their relationships, and you're thinking, I just can't miss out on this. Yeah, polychronic. I'm not saying you're polychronic. Okay, all right. Let me just. I don't want to pry where I shouldn't pry. But does that mean when it comes even like to your class schedule and all your assignments and things, it's you have to be a little bit more intentional to make sure you stay on task?
I don't know. I'd say I definitely prioritize people above assignments because I know the assignments will get done. But
Okay.
I'll get done.
Okay. That's interesting. And that is somewhat of a polychronic idea, because the polychronic person does, in his or her mind, imagine getting things done. It just might not happen in the same way that, yeah. Very good. All right. Let's move on. Number 7. How does environment shape whether a culture is being or doing? How many of you are from a rural, more agricultural, Ella, more rural area? The rest of you all come from urban?
I mean, kind of. I live in a small town in Iowa.
Okay.
Like, even like passing through the church, you can see like fields of like green.
Okay. So in general, it's more of an agricultural culture. Yeah. Isn't it interesting the word agricultural has the word cultural in it? Don't ask me why. All right. So letter A, industrial cultures are normally doing cultures. Again, that's because time is money, and if you're trying to mass produce things, you have to have everybody working together in harmony and sync. That doesn't mean that we're collectivistic, okay? The reason that we have to work in harmony is because we have to be efficient and get things done. Time is money. So don't confuse working together in harmony in a factory, in an urban setting, as collectivism. It might be a small microcosm of collectivism, but it's not really that's not really the mindset of the people. And then letter B, agricultural cultures are normally being cultures. So everybody else comes from a kind of an urban area. How many of you would say I am from a suburban area? Okay, I live in a suburban. Ankeny is basically a suburban city. We don't have a big downtown. We don't have a lot of industry. Okay, Ankeny, Iowa, which is the 4th fastest growing city in the United States by percentage growth, is pretty much a fast growing suburban area. Are there a lot of suburban areas in Germany?
Yeah.
They're not the big city, but they're not farms.
Yeah.
Are you from that kind of an area?
No, I'm from
The city. Which city is it again?
Ingolstadt.
Ingolstadt. Okay, good. Yeah. And Paul? Okay, large city? Okay. Justin, you're from?
More suburban, Sioux City.
Okay, Sioux City up north. Yeah. That's right off 29, right? Or right on 29? Yeah. Delaney, you're from?
Peoria, small city.
Yeah, okay. How many people live in Peoria?
200,000 or 300,000.
Well, okay. That's similar to Des Moines. Des Moines is 200 and something, I think. Yeah. Emma?
Phoenix.
Phoenix. That's, how many millions are in Phoenix?
I don't remember, but it's like 3, I think.
And growing, right? Is it still, yeah.
But not from the people who want to
Not from what?
come. Not from the place we want them to come from.
Not from the place.
From California.
Okay. And they're bringing their liberal politics with them. Yeah. Same thing is happening up in Montana and Idaho. I know that they're talking about the same thing. They're flooding in to get away from the problems in California, but even if they're bringing a worldview along that's going to reproduce the same thing. Yeah. That is an interesting study in and of itself that we really don't get into in this class. You look at the state of Georgia, and that's happened in Georgia. And it's not because the people of Georgia, the original people there, have changed. It's because others are migrating there because they like what they see, but they're bringing that which will eventually not be good. So, all right, interesting. I'm from Toledo, Ohio. And that's about 400,000 or so. Toledo is one of these that used to be, really uppity. I mean, it was the glass capital of the world. If you buy Libby glass, that's from Toledo. The big truck scales they drive over to weigh, in truck stops, those were invented and developed in Toledo. So, there was a time, I don't think it's true anymore, when I was a young person, that there were more restaurants per capita in Toledo, Ohio than any other city in the United States. But that can't be true anymore. Just can't. All right. Okay, the interesting influence of light and darkness. This is a good time to talk about that. All right, I'm thankful that the days are getting longer. I went up and worked out with my son this morning. He has a little workout place down in his basement, and I get on his elliptical, and he does some lifting and stuff. And we meet at 6. And this morning at 6:30, about 6:40 when I left, the sun was rising in the east. I said, yes, Lord, yes. Now, when they change time, then it's going to be dark again for a while in the morning. Have you guys been told? I keep hearing rumors that Congress actually did eliminate the daylight savings time. Once they change back in March, that's going to be it. They're going to forget about time change in the future. I don't know. Is that what you heard? You heard that? I've heard that, and I can't seem to find substantiation for that. I don't know. I hope it's true. It's hard on us. Anyway, light and darkness do have an influence. I mean, if you guys sense that, what is harder than January and February in every way? And I've also been told that even nationally, the suicide rate is higher in January and February than in any other time of year in the United States. All else being equal, the light, the darkness, the short days. I'll just say this too, by way of introduction. When missionaries go to serve in places like Alaska and other places up farther north, in the Nordic world, where you have the land of the midnight, well, you have the land of midnight sun in the other extreme, but then you have almost no light at all at certain times of the year. A lot of agencies will actually require that those missionaries take more frequent furloughs, that their terms of service be shorter, maybe 1 or 2 years, and then come back for a while. Now, if you are a native of that part, then that might not be an issue. Megan, Olson over here works. She grew up there, so she'd probably tell you that. Maybe, I don't know, I've never asked her, but a native would have a little different experience. But somebody who's used to a little more balanced day and night schedule, going to a place like that may find that, it's necessary to come home more frequently. That is not a spiritual weakness. It's just the reality. God created day, to serve a number of purposes, and that's one of them. So anyways, fascinating to think about. Seattle, Washington, I was in Tacoma for 4 years. And Seattle is just about an hour north of Tacoma there in western Washington. And we heard stories about, the suicide rate in Seattle. And this is back before Seattle began to fall apart. Okay, so letter A, the seasons influence people's behavior. Now, it was 56 degrees last week, right? And then today I got up and it was 3. And then next week it's supposed to be 45. Does it do this in Germany with the temperature like this, so up and down? Sometimes. This is a crazy year. This is a really crazy year. Of course, we say that every year. And so, do you find yourself struggling, or if it's rainy, and drizzly all day? Not so much?
Sometimes I like to go walk in the rain, so
You like to walk in the rain?
yeah, a little bit.
Are you a kind of a nostalgic person? Or you like cloudy days and?
No, I'm actually more of a sunny, but every once in a while it's a nice change up, and so I'm more of a sunny person. Like
Yeah.
I love the sun, but if it's every once in a while I like the rain.
You know, that's a really good attitude, Justin. You take it on. You don't try to hide from it or avoid it. You go out and say, if it's going to rain, I'm going to go out and be in it.
Yeah.
I admire that. I wouldn't do that. I'll stay inside. But I appreciate that attitude. That's really cool. I have a son who is nostalgic, and he loves cloudy days. But even he will tell you that they have their limits. Yeah. And I think he probably likes cloudy days more in the hot summer than in the cold winters. Anyway, the seasons do influence you. And so, when we come back for second semester, it can be really hard and it's not just the students. You guys should understand that professors often really wrestle with this too. I went to, when Dr. Damakos was teaching, when I first came to Faith, I remember we went to a 7 o'clock class once, and and he got up and said, "I'm sorry, you guys have to get up in the middle of the night to come to class." And so anyway, the seasons do influence your behavior. So would it be harder for you, thinking about the seasons, would it be easier or harder for you to adjust in a industrial or in an agricultural culture? Let me rephrase that. Which would be easier to adjust to, given the seasons, an agricultural or an industrial culture?
I think more industrial, because I've even noticed a difference at home when there's bad weather and stuff. You're stuck because we live out in the country on a gravel road. You just can't do anything.
Okay.
But then here, when there's bad weather means nothing. You can still drive around and do things.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So that's interesting. The Industrial Revolution kind of helped us to overcome the limitations of weather and that sort of thing. You can have lights on 24 hours a day now in work in an office, whereas before, you had candles or lanterns and that was it. And all right, good. Anybody else want to comment on that? Paul?
Just working from PDI, it's inside. It's a very cold warehouse. So in winter, you don't really feel the difference. Inside is still pretty much the same as outside. So
Yeah.
It's cold both ways. Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, I've heard people from PDI say they actually come out in the wintertime to get warmed up, especially if they work ice cream. They have ice cream again at PDI. They've reintroduced that.
They have those, yeah.
Yeah, and I have heard people who work at PDI talk about the impact that it has on them. And now this is, remember we keep interjecting personality in this conversation. I have 3 sons who did PDI for a while. One of them stayed with the company but became a software engineer later. But 3 of my sons, all 3, I have 1 daughter, all 3 of my sons did work at the warehouse at PDI. And the one that had the most difficulty with the ambiance in there was my now music pastor son, because he's the artsy guy, and he is aesthetically sensitive, as artists tend to be. And so for him, the inside of that warehouse and the darkness and the coolness and all of that was harder to deal with than it was for the other 2. So if you're an artsy kind of a person, more aesthetically inclined, you may find that something like this is more challenging for you. Yeah. Yeah, Jules?
I was gonna suggest an example that I always had. Industrials, during weather like this, I worked at Fairway, and one of the things that I did was take people's carts out.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking this whole time, there's no way nobody would come out. The roads are slushy and it's bad. And then people actually came out, and people in their 90s or 80s came out. I'm like, what are you doing? And so they were doing you have to get groceries to live. You have to get these now, which is kind of an ironic time to get them, but it's they're still more focused on the task of getting it done than I still have food at home.
So yeah, so people in their 80s and 90s are coming out shopping when you think they'd stay home. And some people, just by the way they're wired, just enjoy the challenge of defying the elements. You know, in fact, it actually gives them a high to feel like they're not going to be limited, slowed down by the elements. so again, personality does come back into the picture. Letter B, some who live in especially dark climates may suffer from what's called adaptive lethargy. So, okay, what is lethargy? That's what I feel every Monday morning when I come to class. What is lethargy? Okay, what was the first word you said? Slow, tired. Have a hard time, sometimes people say I need a cup of coffee because I'm feeling lethargic. Yeah, it's that heaviness. There's a heaviness, and you just feel like you're having a hard time getting cranked up and getting going, right? And actually, dark climates can produce that. There's a biological effect. I don't know how much you guys have studied this, and we could get off on a tangent here, but even in the morning when you're sleeping and the sunlight comes into your room, it wakes you up because there's an impact of the light, which is, what's the word? There's a technical medical term for that. Oh, it's on the tip of my tongue. It's something that comes in the sun rays that actually kind of shakes you and gets you awake. Something toast. Oh, huh? Yeah, there's a word that's just right there. But anyway, and so that's why in the morning, even if your eyes are closed, with the sunlight's coming in, it'll tend to wake you up. And on the contrary, at night, if you're going to bed and it's still light outside, you may toss and turn and have a hard time getting to sleep, even though you're very tired because of that. I'll think of the word later and tell you. And so adaptive lethargy is the idea of you become accustomed to that, and it can actually, you can actually appear to others as though you're lazy or you're disinterested, when really you're dealing with a very real, biological impact. So, and I'm not trying to give you an excuse for not being faithful in January and February, say, well, professors shouldn't give us homework in January and February. That's maybe the best time. Maybe one of the best cures for this is to, have a lot to do to keep you forcing yourself to go forward. I do not look forward to going over to my son's house at 6 o'clock in the morning on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to work out with him. I make myself do it anyway. People who, once I get there, I'm fine. People who adjust their activities for the seasons are less bothered by varying weather. So farmers, for instance, now they may get frustrated when they can't plant because it's raining, right through April and into May, but in general, all things being equal, generally people who live in an agricultural climate are more easily adaptive because they've learned over the years that they simply can't fight the weather. You have to adjust. Yeah.
Last Christmas break, I had a friend who was from Canada come stay with us for the break because she couldn't go home between the school years. And she lives on a farm in Canada, and their winters are so much colder and so much worse. But she struggled a lot more in the Illinois winter because we were in the middle of the city, and so it was like all the fun things about winter were gone, and it was just cold. And so even though she was used to the winter and the seasons changing, it was really difficult for her.
So there were things that she could do because of their climate. There were certain winter activities that they could look forward to. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have a brother that still lives in Toledo where I grew up, and I'd forgotten this, but Toledo's pretty rainy. In fact, Toledo was a swamp. Toledo used to be uninhabited, and they had to actually pump. I mean, it was years and years, decades of pumping water out of the plains there in order to make it. He still has a water table about this deep in the ground of his house, and it's been raining there. I called him just yesterday. We got this snowstorm. It's been raining in Toledo, and it just everything kind of what do you do? What are you going to do outside? And I would personally much rather have this than rain and drizzle. In Tacoma, Washington, I told you I lived there for 4 years. this is in general, from October until March, it's basically 40s and drizzly. Now that's probably a bit of an exaggeration, and I remember I wanted to get into jogging when I was in seminary to keep and I'd go out there and try it, and it's drizzly, and they told us you can tell a visitor in Tacoma because they have an umbrella. It's, because it doesn't drizzle enough to get you soaked, it just drizzles enough to make you feel kind of lethargic. And I really wrestled with that. They talk about the beauty of Western Washington. And then one year, you guys have all heard of El Nino. Thanks, Justin. El Nino is that big system that comes in and out. One year, El Nino didn't go out. And so, everybody's expecting that April, May, it's going to start getting sunny. And the whole summer was cloudy. And I thought, oh, man. They said it happens about every 10 years. It happened, we were there. And I remember seriously struggling with that. The drizzle, 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 drizzle. Like 40s, I don't mind if it rains and it's 90. It actually feels kind of good. So it's a real thing. Letter D, being cultures adapt better to the natural environment than doing cultures. And I think that kind of just stands to reason, right? Letter E, doing cultures spend less time outside. Because so much, well, let me ask you this. What would be the reason for that? Why do doing cultures, can't you go outside and do? You can be very active outside. So why is it that in general doing cultures are inside more? Yeah, Jules?
A little bit of a personal example is like, here, I don't play in the snow as much. Well, I have things to do, but also like people aren't out as much. Because we have like homework, versus at home, like I could be like sitting with my nephews and going outside and playing.
Okay.
And that's because we don't have a set schedule for like things that aren't have to be done.
Okay, good. So doing cultures are normally more industrialized cultures, which means that they have become very, very connected to technology. Technology is what drives a lot of the urbanization and things. And most of your technology is done inside. So, computers, machines, you name it. That's why doing cultures spend more time inside. That's your reality here. Your responsibilities, for the most part, force you to be inside. Yeah. All right. This is not in your notes, but I thought it was interesting. A quote coming from the Nomad Hostel. It is a cultural revolution, the slow movement, against the notion that faster is always better. The slow philosophy, capital S because that's the title of this, the slow philosophy is not about doing everything at a snail's pace. It's about seeking to do everything at the right speed, savoring the hours and minutes rather than just counting them. Doing everything as well as possible instead of as fast as possible. It's about quality over quantity and everything from work to food to parenting. Now, actually, if I remember correct, that is not a Christian site, but there are some Christian principles in there. What do you like about there? Or is there anything you don't like? Do you think, is there anything there that doesn't sound good? Or do you like it? Yeah, Delaney?
I like the savoring the hours and minutes. It kind of reminds me of redeeming the time. Like, you make the most of it. You don't just stuff stuff in, but like you're using it for I don't know if that's too small of a distinction.
Okay, good. Yeah, Emma?
I like it's about quality over quantity. That reminds me about doing everything for the better, to the
Yeah.
best of your ability for the Lord.
Yeah. And Emma, I know this may be hard to understand. We as a faculty really do wrestle with this because we realize there's a certain amount of content that students just need to get in order to complete a course. And yet we also realize that the hidden danger in that, it's not so hidden, it's pretty obvious. The danger there is actually fostering an attitude of just getting stuff done because I got all these assignments. We really don't want to do that, and yet just part of the nature of the educational beast is that we have to. And so that's an ongoing struggle. How much reading, does the professor give you? How many assignments? And we're constantly, trying to deal with this and create a balance. It's hard to do. Jules?
I was gonna say I like say something like saving the hours and minutes. And the example I thought of it isn't like so biblical, but it is actually an idea, like a current thing that happens is it's kind of like being paid by the hour versus being paid by the job. And like being paid by the job is you get paid the same amount, no matter how. Being paid by the hour is like, okay, I got stuff to get done. If I don't get it done within a certain amount of time, I'm not going to complete the job, and I'm going to just be stressed over it.
Okay, yeah. So, and there are pros and cons on both sides. For the sake of our online students, Jules was talking about the difference between being paid by the hour and being paid by the job. What would be the hidden danger of paying somebody for the job? Saying, I'm going to pay you this amount no matter how long it takes. What's the hidden danger there? I don't know who was first there.
There's no accountability on like how well it gets, or they can just take it forever. Like you pay someone to help you renovate your bathroom or do whatever, and like I'm paying you to put tile up in my shower or whatever, and then they can take forever, or there's no really emphasis on I'm paying you and you have this amount of time and I'm only paying you for this certain amount of time.
Okay. All right, Delaney and then Paul.
Or on the flip side, if you're the person doing the job, then it could take forever and be really, really difficult, and you're just getting the same amount.
Okay. All right. Paul?
I'm going with what Aaron was saying. If the person's paying by the salary, by the payments, it'll be hard for them to find another way of getting money. Because if someone contracts them, it's like, hey, I have work for you to do, and I'll pay you this much. He compare that with the other one. So he will probably decide to go to the other one and work for that person, and even if he has the other project he hasn't finished yet, so he'll see the other person pay me more, so I gotta do this for him and come back and do for the other person because he's giving me more than the other person.
Okay, yeah. There are pros and cons on both sides. We dealt with this in Brazil when we were building stuff. The danger with paying one lump sum is that it's very easy to take shortcuts and just get it done quick, make it look good because, I'm making more per hour when I do that, right? And so I get on to the next job, and so there were certain guys that would just definitely leave certain things out. They'd make it look good and they're done because they're getting paid a lump sum. So the sooner I get this done, the more I make for less work. But the problem on the other end, if you pay by the hour, is that you can purposely drag it out because it doesn't matter how, the longer it takes, the more money I'm going to make on this job, especially if I'm having trouble finding work, as long as I can stay here. And I had people like they just wanted me to, and I had to keep pushing them to get it done. So there are challenges on both sides of the equation, We live in a fallen world, right? But anyway, this is interesting. I read this and I find this kind of refreshing. Because I tend to be a little bit higher strung, in case you haven't noticed that. Slow philosophy is not about doing everything at a snail's pace. It's not about being lazy and lethargic. It's about seeking to do everything at the right speed. Now, that's the challenge. What is the right speed? How much time should you spend on a paper in order to say that you gave it your best shot? I mean, you could say, if I really want to give this paper my best shot, I'm going to need 2 years to do it. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Somewhere along the line, you got to say, okay, I've spent enough time on this. We do have a scale here at the school, and you're probably aware of this, that generally speaking, just overall, for every hour in the classroom you spend, you should spend about how much time out of the classroom for each hour in. Did they tell you this in orientation or anything? Generally, it's 2 hours out for every hour you spend in. That's going to depend on the class. For instance, if you're taking Greek, it's yeah, you're laughing. Yeah, you're right. You are taking Greek, right? You need more than that, right? But in other classes, you don't. And so, in general, that's kind of the idea. But anyway, I just thought it was kind of an interesting read. And again, we don't live in a perfect world, and so we're always going to be wrestling to try to strike a balance. Charles Ryrie wrote a book once called Balancing the Christian Life, and it was a really good title because it's a constant, lifelong endeavor to try and strike a balance in a lot of areas, and this one included. All right, time is up. We'll stop with the slow movement and pick it up on Monday. So, Jules, you're on Monday, right? Thank you.
Dr.